Hey everyone, Once Bitten here. So this is a channel update, October 30th, 2015. And despite rumors to the contrary, no, this channel is not dead. I apologize for not uploading really any videos lately. The fact is I haven't been playing any games. Games Workshop and it's changing so dramatically from 8th edition to Age of Sigmar has thrown the whole gaming scene in just a real mess. And excuse me. So I haven't really been that enthused lately, and yeah, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I've got such a commitment, such an investment into models and such a history with playing and with this channel that it was tough to walk away from. But at the same time, Age of Sigmar just wasn't going to cut it. So I think if you follow my channel, you should see that I said that I was going to try out Kings of War and try out Ninth Age and see what I thought and go from there. And a shift that I've experienced lately is I'm not really seeing Kings of War and Ninth Age as being mutually exclusive. Like I don't really see the reason why I can only play one game or not the other. I've I have played no games of Ninth Age and I've played one game of Kings of War. Um, yeah, there's an amazing lack of gaming on my part recently. So the Kings of War game I played, it was okay. It was fun. I think it was fun hanging out with a buddy and learning a new game. It left me feeling a little bit empty. Like I just felt there were so few decision points to be made that I think it could remain fun for a dozen games, and then I was just skeptical it could remain fun after that. And my opinion on that is probably not helped by the fact that several people I know that have played Warhammer 8th Edition switched to Kings of War and have since switched away to something else because they said that after a few dozen games it just wasn't fun anymore. I'm sure not everybody feels that way. I think Kings of War is probably a fine game, and it's not difficult to learn. It's so streamlined that I don't think it's going to take too much brain space to keep the rules in mind. So I can see me playing, especially if I have buddies that play Kings of War. I could see me playing that with them. I don't think it would replace. It'd be the only game I played. I think probably after a while I probably just wouldn't play anything. Is my guess if that was the only option I had. So um, I plan on playing it from time to time, and if I change my mind, you will certainly know because you will see the battle reports and you'll hear me talking about it. One thing that happened recently is I was invited to help with the Ninth Age project um, to create their Beast Herds book, which is their take on the Beastman book. And um, as it turns out, in hindsight, I've been working on it now for a few weeks, at least three. It's probably about the best thing that could have happened to my hobbying, and I'll talk more about that. So if you don't know what Ninth Age is, I'll go over it just a little bit. But one, the website is there on the screen. It's www dot and then everything spelled out with hyphens between it. So the hyphen ninth hyphen age.com. Highly recommend going there. I think to access some things you might just need to register on the site, but there's no advertising. There's no payment or anything. Just register and you can have access to a lot of files. So what is the Ninth Age? In case you don't know, we'll tell you what. I'll give an overview of the Ninth Age, its origins, its purpose, what it's all about. I'll talk about my participation on the Beast Herds book, and then talk about what to expect from Ninth Age in the future and what to expect from my channel in the future. So starting off, Ninth Age, it's a player-created rule set that's really designed to replace Warhammer Fantasy. Warhammer Fantasy went away. Games Workshop decided they were just done with it. Presumably their sales just were never that good. They switched to a game that was much easier and faster to learn, that was much smaller, and they presumably they think they can bring in a lot of new players with their Age of Sigmar game now. And more power to them. I just don't care. But for the game that I loved and what I loved about the game, it died, and a lot of people felt the same way. So the people that were involved in creating compositions that would allow Warhammer 8th Edition to be played more fairly in tournaments. They were creating comp systems, the ETC comp system and the Swedish comp, or I'm sorry, the ETC tournament, which kind of designed their own comp system, and the Swedish comp system. The creators kind of merged together and said, "Hey, let's create a rule set that doesn't need composition. Um, that's based for the most part on Warhammer Fantasy 8th Edition, and we fix the things that were broken, and we try to make it fair, and we just try to make it a better game for people that want a good, solid game." So these are tournament-focused people, so they're wanting things like balance between armies, balance within armies. They want tactics to matter. Um, they don't want to design a game where it's just wonky and crazy, and you throw dice at something and something crazy happens, and you snatch defeat from the jaws, or you snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. That's not really what they're about. They're like, can we make it to where it's a game, and can we have some clarity around the rules? They don't want extreme randomness, and they don't want a lot of abuse in the rules or an armyless creation. Now, those things are, of course, tough to achieve completely, but that's at least what their intent is. I say they loosely because, who is they? There's a certainly there's an executive committee of I don't know how many people, probably between half a dozen and a dozen, and then there's just tons and tons of people on the project in various roles. Nobody gets paid for anything. It's all volunteer, and everybody is an experienced Warhammer player. So, what's the impetus for the Ninth Age, besides the fact that Games Workshop basically shoved all of us players out the door? Well, for one, even when Games Workshop had things going on, the main thing they had was brand recognition. They were just the big name, but everything they did, I don't want to say everything they did, they make beautiful models. I'll still give them that. But a lot of things they did were just horrible if you were interested in playing a game that had a good rule set. For one, the rules were not written well. They could be interpreted multiple ways, and then Games Workshop didn't really address frequently asked questions. They didn't write erratas. They just didn't do anything. They just kind of said that it is what it is. Deal with it. And really, what they said was, "Hey, this is just a fun game. Don't take it so seriously. Figure it out." And which is fine if you only play three other people, and you guys can come to mutual understandings of how you're going to play it. But if you want to play with larger communities, that just doesn't work. Um, a problem with Warhammer Fantasy for a long time has been imbalance. There was just army book. There were always top tier books, lower tier books. They weren't balanced at all. That's why things like the ETC and Swedish Comp worked so hard to try to find a way to create better balance between the books. Presumably, Games Workshop did that because they'd want to sell new models. So if they created a new unit and created a new model to go along with it, they would make that unit very, very powerful, very, very low points for it. The models would cost a lot of money, and they would sell a lot of those models because they flat out are better than anything else you could put in the game. Um, so that kind of sucked. It kind of forced you to play certain things, and then you couldn't play some of your favorite models because in the current iteration of your army book, they were just underpowered. And you could play them in a friendly game, but if you wanted a chance at winning, you couldn't realistically take them. I've been playing. I don't know how long I've been playing. Probably about a decade now. Consistently, I played a little while before that, but always I got the impression that the Games Workshop there was an apparent unconcern for players. They just didn't care. They did their thing. They didn't really have a good mechanism for soliciting feedback and addressing issues or anything like that. They just did what they did. Period. I like to think they were as nimble as the Titanic. Um, so, but I think them kicking fantasy to the curb was probably the best thing that could have happened if you liked that kind of game. Because now they kind of took themselves out of the game, where you don't have to compete against Games Workshop, and you could actually create a game that was better. So Kings of Wars is a step in that direction. It's a clean game, clean rules, relatively balanced. The way they achieved balance was by almost making every army the same. That's a bit of an overstatement, but not really. I mean, there's a lot of streamlining that went on there, and so it was a step in that direction. The people that formed the Ninth Age, um, they want to say what we're all attempting to do is, can we keep the flavor of the game and the things that brought most of us to it initially, can we keep those things? The distinctive armies, the big epic, the feel of epic battles, things like that. So anyway, so they asked me to join in what they call the Beast Herds, which took over from the Beast Men army book team. So I'm really hoping we can get a video later with everybody on it. We tried it once and they had some technical issues, but there were three people on the Army Book Committee and then two people in Army Book support. So the three people on the committee, there was me, Once Bitten, a guy named Rory, and a guy named Frederick. I'm leaving their names and locations off because I don't know how anonymous they want to be. I found it really interesting, and I think at the end of the day we had a good team because we had three kind of distinctive ways of approaching the Army book creation. Three things we were looking for. So my bias is that, I'm thinking, well, if you want me to help create this book, I want to create a book that I would want to play. And when I play a book, I want options. I want to be able to create a army that has a toolkit where there is a tool for every threat I might encounter. I call that my Batman approach. That doesn't mean that everything does everything. It means that you can put together a list that can counter anything you're worried about. I will say right now I'm not sure that we achieved all that, but that was my perspective. That was where I was coming from with everything. There's a guy named Rory, the great guy. This guy's been playing Beastmen forever. He loves Beastmen, and he wanted to make sure that this book was consistent with the historical feel and flavor of the army. We've had so many friendly arguments with him saying, but that's not how Beastmen work, and me saying, well, I don't care, and him saying, well, you should care, and it went back and forth, and it was really he has been a really, really important person on the team, and I think because of him, the Beast Herd Army book has maintained for the most part. He probably might disagree with me, but I think it's maintained for the most part the same kind of feel and flavor that it's always had. Then there's Frederick from Germany. This guy is just a consistent ETC tournament winner. He wants an army book that is capable of complex strategies. He wants a book that can win tournaments. It was interesting because Rory was very happy to have an army book that was slightly underpowered because Beastmen have always been that way. And Frederick and I just teamed up against him and said, no, we do not want that. We want a book that is just as capable of winning as any other book. And again, I don't know if we accomplished that or not. It's impossible to know at this point, but that was our intent. So Rory, Frederick, and I with the Army Book Committee, we spent a lot of times on forums and on Skype sessions talking about the Army Book and what to do and engaging in a lot of arguments. Sam and Jeff are both also from the United States, and they were our link with the community. So they spent a lot more time on the forums soliciting input and coming to us with things that they heard people saying after playtesting or just seeing what we've done and offering opinions on things. Very, very helpful and important in the process as well. So when we started this project, they said, okay, here are the parameters you're working with when you create this army book. One, my understanding was we weren't supposed to create any new units. In preparing for this video, I saw on their post they actually said we could have up to 2. Darn it, it never occurred to me. Although I don't think Rory would have let us because to add a new unit means it'd be different from previous editions, and he was always against that. But my understanding was we weren't supposed to add any new units. We were supposed to trim down our magic items, so there's between 8 and 10 magic items total. So that means you had to make tough decisions. What do you keep? What do you get rid of? Do you try to keep things like the Herdstone in the Beast book or the Ramhorn helm and things like that? Things that were just kind of iconic. When you think of Beastmen, you think of these things. The truth is you could not keep all of them and keep it within 10. And then they said, you know what? And don't use gimmicks to get more. Don't say we're going to have 10 magic items and then have 10, let's say, mutations. And the mutations are really just things that you would see in an army books in a magic item list. So you really just now have 2 magic item lists. They're like, we get it. Don't do that. Do something else. If you want something special, like mutations, do something different. Don't just create new magic items. So that's the way that we interpreted that was not to create static upgrades, like take this extra thing and this unit now has +1 attack or +1 strength or +1 weapon skill or something like that. Now, at the time of this recording, I'm seeing some other army books that were created, and it looks like other people did do things like that. And I can't speak, I don't know if that'll go through, and I can't speak to their processes. But I can tell you that in creating our book, we based it on the premise that we weren't supposed to just do things, make static upgrades. It was important that there wasn't just one type of list that could be built for an army book. At least 3 different play styles should be able to be used from it. So I like that. And they were really big on, hey, let's not have these unkillable characters, unbreakable units. Let's really limit stubborn. If your unit does things that are good, that's great, but can they have a weakness too? And that was interesting because it's not hard to design that, but whenever we put that out for the community, we always got feedback, and people were just throwing fits about the weaknesses that a unit would have. I'll give you, for instance, our Minotaurs, unless they get changed, but our Minotaurs are awesome. They are so killy. But they're still toughness 4 with a 6-up light armor save, and they're frenzied, so they always have to overrun. So they're fantastic at things they do well, and then they have a weakness. And then when we put that out there, we consistently get feedback that, hey, we really need to do something to those Minotaurs to make them survive more. It's like, no, that's not the point. The point is not to make the uber unit. The point is to make interesting units that can do things well and then have weaknesses. Other parameters: maintain the feel and flavor of the army. Thanks to Rory, we kind of did that. Focus on the army's strengths and keep the army's weaknesses. That means in doing the Beastmen, we couldn't just go around giving armor saves to units and to characters, because armor is not in the feel and flavor of the Beastmen army. We decided that we wanted to focus on ambushing and on speed for relatively infantry heavy army, because we don't have any monstrous cavalry or anything like that. And I like the idea of keeping all our monsters. We have 4 possible monsters in the 8th edition book, and I wanted to keep them all because I like the idea of monsters in a Beastman army. We were asked to try to maintain internal balance. That is so difficult. Balance is so tough. And I really appreciate the process that the Ninth Age team has put together to try to encourage balance. I'm not going to talk about it all now, but I think if you listen for it, you'll hear it throughout this video. So for us, when we're creating the army book, they're saying we don't want anything in the book to be an auto include. If it's that much better than everything else, you need to tone it down. Everything in the book should be playable, and it should, as far as you can, it should be equally playable. And that's really tough. What's really tough about that isn't so much in the design, it's in having people appreciate it. Because I know, again, when we post things to the community and say this is how we design things, you'll have somebody come back and say, oh, Minotaurs kill stuff so well, nobody will ever take anything else. And it's like, well, that's not really true. I mean, there are other things you can take. They're just good at different things. And again, I like a Batman approach. I like units. If you take this unit, it's good at this. If you take that unit, it's good at that. There is no uber unit. But anyway, so there was instructions to try to maintain internal balance. As far as external balance, it was absolutely impossible for us because we don't have anything to compare this to in terms of other armies. We were able to see what other armies posted in terms of pre-releases, like they would come up with something that the rules team had not evaluated and say, okay, we're thinking about this for our army book. And we would look at that and say, oh my gosh, are you kidding? our book is so underpowered. And the rules team would come to us and say, don't worry about it. That book is overpowered. We're going to tone it down. They went overboard on a couple things. So basically they said, try to keep it consistent with what was called the TAC, which was the Temporary Army Compendium, I think, that they created before. They basically took the 8th edition Army books and tweaked them and said, okay, play with this for now. And they said, so try to keep it to that power level. So unit by unit, in terms of stats, nobody, I think, changed too much. But I think what a lot of us were focusing on is how do you create unique dynamics within the army that allow for distinctive play styles, army by army. And they said so we rely a lot on this rules team, and they're the only ones that are really looking at all the army books. And so when we think we have our army book ready, they come in and look at it and they say, well, these units are probably overcosted. These units are probably undercosted. This unit or this ability is a little bit over the top, a little overpowered when combined with all the other abilities. They're the ones coming in trying to achieve external balance. And when I say external balance, in case you don't know, I mean balance between army books. So what I think is really cool is this notion of balance is an ongoing process. So here in the next week, all the army books are going to be released, and as far as people can do now, they will be balanced. Everything in the books and everything between the books will be perfectly balanced. Except you and I both know it won't be balanced. It can't be. Nobody's that good. And so the notion is that if you're on the Army Book Committee, and presumably most people will stay on it, and then your job changes, and now your job is to listen to feedback from players going to tournaments and stuff like that, saying, are there armies that are consistently placing higher at tournaments than other armies? If so, then we have a balance problem, and we step in and we address it. We tone down the powerful armies, we beef up the less powerful armies. And so this isn't like with, for the last forever with Games Workshop, they would come out with army books, and you would notice this imbalance, and there was nothing you can do. You can't change the army books. There's nothing you can do except what? Create a comp system? Well, with this, I don't say time period, I don't know how frequently, but on some frequency, we step in and we tweak things to try to achieve this external balance. So I find that fascinating. I find that really, really cool. They also said, by the way, to try to reduce the worst random elements, that there's going to be randomness in the game. That's part of the fun of the game. That's part of the nature of any dice rolling game. But they didn't want anything that, hey, if you roll this, then that wins the game or that loses the game. That's not the point of anything. And I imagine that made things difficult for the Orcs and Goblins army because, that was kind of their theme, was they were random. If everything went well with Orcs and Goblins, they were powerhouses. They were so good. But the problem is, at crucial times, they would fail animosity or something, and you see the player across the table just ready to throw something against the wall. And so, how do you balance that? How do you take an army that's built on randomness and take out the random elements, the worst of the random elements, without destroying the feel and flavor of that army? I don't know to what extent they were able to do that. I've heard that they've had a lot of knockdown, drag out fights in trying to accomplish that. I'm really curious to see their book. But anyway, that's one of the parameters we were working within too. Let's see. We had to rename all the units. Some people come back to us and said, I like the old names. Like, well, sorry for IP issues. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking out what IP stands for. How embarrassing. Intellectual property issues. We can't use the names that Games Workshop use, so we have to rename things. So sorry. And I can tell you right now, at the Beastman book, I don't like some of the names. Nobody likes some of the names. But whenever we've put a feeler out there for new names, nobody's really said anything. I would expect that we might change some names in the future. There are no special characters yet. That will be a future project. We're going to create special characters. Right now, that just wasn't a priority. And this balance issue is tough enough as it is. Special characters make it so much more difficult. So we'll get to that eventually. One of the parameters was that all models that people own because they've been playing fantasy for a long time should be playable. So they wanted us to merge units that were similar, like, merge them and just give more options to the units so that you can kind of take the things people are used to taking. But let's try to simplify things as much as we can. But don't cut out units where people will own models and they won't be able to be used. And I bought something recently because I knew that was a parameter, and I'll cover that later. Strive for simplicity over complexity. And that's difficult. I know in our book, it's one thing to say, yeah, when in doubt, go for simple. But then when you're trying to create dynamics for how an army plays, sometimes things just kind of get a little bit complex. But nevertheless, the goal was to never make it more complex than it needed to be. So, yeah, there's been so much work. I don't even want to know how many hours a week I've put into this over the last few weeks. I would say easily 20, maybe a lot more. Just a lot of time. I am so excited to play this Beastman book. Because, part of it is because, I helped design it, and now I'm wondering, were we right? Does this work? there's when you see the Beastman book, I mean, you kind of have some things aren't at first noticeable, but when you start pairing up special rules with unit specific rules and things like that, you notice there's some real synergies possible. And that's part of my Batman approach. I really like synergies. So, in the coming week, they're going to have their beta release, which is not their final release, of course. That's why they call it a beta. But the main rules, the paths of magic, and there'll be an army compendium with all the army books there. And then they're putting it out saying, great, it's playable. Here you go. I can tell you that for the most part, in the main rule book, they tried to keep things as close to 8th edition as they could, and yet fix the things that were causing a lot of problems. And that's a challenge because then you start asking for feedback on the forums, and then you see, God, when you read people's feedback, they come up with these fantastic, really innovative ideas, but it's different than what 8th edition was. And so, where do you strike that balance between making a better game and keeping a game that's close to 8th? I've criticized them before for changing things that weren't absolutely necessary to change, simply from the perspective of if we want people to switch over, it'll be easier the closer it is to what 8th edition was. In all honesty, I haven't read the most recent iterations of the rules because I knew they were going to keep changing. I was tired of getting confused. I'm really interested in seeing the beta version of the main rulebook. And I'm really interested to see how the armies play, especially my armies. I mean, I kind of know how Beastmen should play, but I'm really interested to see the new Bretonnian army, the Knights of Ecotane, and the new Empire army. I think it's called Empire of Men, but I think they might have tweaked that at the last minute. So I'm super excited to see the new synergies that were created there. Again, these are not just the same old units are there, but there's a lot of new army rules. Oh, and that's the point I was trying to make. In the main rule book, for the most part, they were trying to keep the rules as consistent with 8th edition as possible. In the army books, that's really not the case. They wanted the feel and flavor the same. They wanted the units the same, but the special rules and the synergies of the army, those were up for grabs, and the army book committees, I think, really ran with it. From what I've heard, there's been a lot of really creative ideas about how to make armies better and more interesting to play. And it's interesting because when I was doing this, I was spending so much time working on the Beast Herd book that I wasn't looking at things from other books that were put out there. And then I would hear about them, and I'm thinking, wow, I never considered doing that kind of thing. And I wonder how all the books would be different if we had all gotten together and talked about the different ways of approaching this. How do you create synergy in an army book? Anyway, there's some really cool stuff. I'm interested in seeing it. So what I think is really cool too is this is not a company that we're relying on to do stuff. When there's an idea, people just start doing it. So I saw on the forum one guy said, "Hey, one thing I'm thinking about doing is whenever the Paths of Magic are done, I'm just going to create digital files for the Magic cards and make them available so that whoever's playing this game can just download them and create their own Magic cards." I'm thinking, freaking A, man, that's awesome. Thank you. That's the kind of stuff that's really cool. There are people working on art and then background, what we usually call fluff, background storylines, because there's a big part of the hobby that's an important part of. And whereas before that was done in the army books, where people wrote that, now there'll be a place in the forums where that kind of stuff will be. I'm really, really excited to see that. And then you see players offering to create the army builder and other apps and software programs where you can create army lists, where players are saying, "Hey, I know how to do that kind of stuff, and I'll create files so that we can create army lists very easily with this stuff." I love that. I love the synergy of it. I love that the players are coming together to make this something really cool. Then, and I saw this from one of the people on the executive board, I thought this was very cool. They're like, right now we're coming out with the main rule book, the Paths of Magic. We're going to come out with all the army books. We can't do everything right now, but here are things that are going to come out in the future, probably. One, what if we had the next thing we started releasing were a series of appendices? And these are things that are not fully play tested, where we just put them out. We get people, people design them. We put them out there and say, hey, if you want to do this kind of thing, start playing around with it and play test it and give us feedback so we can make it better. So things like rules for allies or campaigns, having an appendix for new armies. So what if, people have for the longest time been saying, what about Araby and Cathay? They used to be armies and they're no longer around anymore, um, or there are other ideas for armies that people had. Well, we can, people can create it. We can put it as an appendix and say, it's the kind of thing that in your friendly gaming group play with, see how this works, give us feedback, and if we get it fine tuned enough, then boom, we can just add it to the army list later because there's no reason why we can't. One thing I would throw in there is I'm still looking for a good set of castle rules. I've spent so many, I was going to say so many hours. I've spent so many dozens of hours painting my castle set. It's beautiful. I really want to use this thing, but every time I go to play some kind of castle scenario, the rules are so one-sided it just doesn't work. But I love the idea that we can have this kind of series of appendices with different things to make the game more interesting. So here's a cool story. So I was in one of my local gaming stores. I was talking to one of the owners, and we were talking about the Ninth Age, and I said, one concern that people have had is that how do we get new players in? I mean, Warhammer Fantasy has really struggled in the last decade getting in new players. It's just there's a big barrier to entry. The rule book's really expensive. The rules are really poorly written. I want to say they were complex. It's not they're just that complex. They're just poorly written, and there's a ton of them. Learning the game is really difficult. Learning to play it competitively just takes a lot of time. Um, and he said, what would be helpful is if I could have like a really short version of the rules, like simplified rules, pared down, leave things out if you need to. I don't care. I need something that's 6 pages or less that I could give to a new player, and especially something that focused on smaller games so that they weren't staring down the barrel of a 2,500 point army. That's a lot of money in models. It's a lot of time to assemble. It's a ton of time to paint. And that's, again, you're also facing the problem with how do you learn the rules. And so he told this to me, and I said, yeah, that's true. So I went to the Ninth Age forums, and I made a post about. Now, in fairness, this is an internal post, so if you went there, you probably wouldn't be able to see it. But I posted saying it would be nice if we had some volunteers who are good at games design that could take the rule book and pare it down, cut out some rules, make it really, really simple that somebody could look at, and within half an hour could know how to play the game, could play a simple, small game, just like what Games Workshop was always trying to get their stores to do. And just like that, just at the snap of the fingers, like, yeah, that's a good idea. So, um, yeah, let's do that. Any volunteers? And then somebody else came on and said, well, yeah, this other dude and I are kind of working on something like that. We would love to do that. And so, boom. In the near future, I think the introductory rule set will be written. I think the thing that'll take the longest is the rules team will need to look at it and just make sure that it's consistent with everything. And then we can actually provide that for local game stores. There are 2 local game stores that I frequent most commonly, and I just make sure that they have one or more copies of that they can provide to new players. Because again, new people that are interested in this kind of thing can buy models from Games Workshop, they can buy it from Mantic, they can buy it from Reaper, anywhere they want, and maybe they're already playing Age of Sigmar or maybe Kings of War, whatever. I'm not trying to steal players from Kings of War, but they could be playing behind another game system and already have some models, and they can try this out. So I think that I loved how there's a player idea. It got posted on the forums. The powers that be, I like to call them, said, "Hey, that's not a bad idea. It's not hard to do. We have hundreds of people interested. I think there's 2,000 people um, who actively have participated on the forums in the last few weeks. There's a lot of people there that are willing to jump in and do stuff. So I thought that was very cool. They're also planning on creating a how to play this game series of videos. And I know that because I said I was willing to do something like that to try to help new players learn to play the game. And they said, well, we're planning on doing that anyway. I said, fantastic. That's less work for me. I think there's some people that would rather watch some videos and learn how to play than sit down and read a rule book. So that's great. And then, as I've said before, this notion of constant refining I find just really, really cool. If we did a bad job with the Beastman book and it does turn out to be a little too difficult to win with, that it's a lower tier army, you know what? We'll sit back down with it and we'll figure it out. We'll make things better. And there's this constant refinement process of keeping books fun to play and competitive with the other books. So, what can you expect from my channel? Well, things I've been doing, by the way, um, over the, over the last few weeks, as I've gotten more interested in the hobby, I went out and bought two sets of the Garden of Moor scenarios. One because I wanted to paint one set just to use as terrain, and I wanted to use another set with part of my um, undead. Eventually I want both undead armies, and so I wanted just to have the second one. I've been painting one of them, and I think it looks beautiful. It's just not quite done yet, but when I get battle reports up in the near future, you'll see that probably. I went out and bought a giant so I could have a beastman giant in our beast herd book. Unless it gets changed right now, we have a giant that can ambush, and I think that's just awesome. That's very much a beast. No other army has something. Other armies have ambushing things, but nobody has an ambushing giant. So I had to go out and buy a giant so I could do that, and I thought that was very cool. And then I went out and bought a Coven Throne just because I wanted to paint it, and I knew that even though I haven't looked at the new Vampire Counts book or whatever they're calling it, I know that I can play it because there should be internal balance, and whatever they're calling the Coven Throne in the new book should be balanced enough with all the other units in the book that I had faith that I could buy it, paint it up, and be able to eventually use it. That for me has been very, very exciting. Um, Challenges I'm facing is I think I have to really help build a new local scene because right now the scene is just it's just absolutely gone away, and I'm fully to blame for that too because I haven't played a game in months. Um, so I'm working on that. So we'll see. That's going to be one of the more difficult things of trying to find a game. Is there anybody around that considers themselves still a fantasy player? So we'll see. One thing I would like to do, one thing, by way of background, one thing I was really mad at Games Workshop for is I spent all this money on three of the five End Times books, or two books each, but you know what I mean. And now it's like, and then you ended the game. It's like you sold all this stuff and then you ended the game. I mean, we could still use it, of course, but nobody usually does play an old edition. And now I'm thinking, I bet we could play those scenarios using well, either Kings of War or Ninth Age rules, and it still might make for a fun campaign to play. So that's one thing I'm thinking about doing as a way of helping start the new local scene is trying to work through the End Times campaign still, just using different rules. As far as videos, like I said, I sure hope I can start getting some games and get some battle reports up. One thing I want to do too is I plan on doing a book review for each army. And what I'd like to do is not only go through the books themselves, but have the Army Book Committee members on there with me so they can talk to me about why they did things the way they did, what they were thinking, and things like that. I think that'd be really cool. The Beast Herds book will almost certainly be first. We already tried one, and like I said, we just had technical issues. We had it recorded, and the visuals got all messed up. And I think that's okay because the book we're reviewing was our pre-beta book, and now we have changed. The book has changed in dramatic enough ways that we need to do a new one anyway. Um, so for every army out there, however many that is, that's a lot of videos that'll be coming in the near future. I don't know if I can do more than one every couple weeks, but we'll see. I can say that I'm dying to play. I'm more excited than I've been in a long time with this hobby, and it feels good to be excited. I hope that I don't fall flat on my face and just not able to find games to play. But as of now, I'm excited to play, and so uh, that's nice. So, like I said, hopefully you'll see some battle reports on the channel in the very near future. So that's it for the channel update. Hope you enjoyed it.